Exploring the Arctic, the security risks of China's expanding influence in Greenland amidst international tensions. Overview of China's Arctic interests. China's engagement in the Arctic has shifted dramatically over the last 2 decades. Initially focused on scientific research, China's ambitions have evolved towards commercial development, military enhancement, and strategic positioning. This transition was formally recognized in the Chinese Communist Party's 12th Five-Year Plan in 2011, which emphasized the importance of Arctic exploration. The 2018 Arctic Policy document further solidified China's intentions, incorporating the concept of the Polar Silk Road as part of the broader Belt and Road Initiative. This strategic framework aims to secure access to the Arctic's abundant resources and emerging shipping routes, which are becoming increasingly accessible due to climate change. Security concerns and military developments. The growing military dimension of China's Arctic strategy has raised alarms among other Arctic nations and global powers. Following the enactment of China's 2015 National Security Law, which specifically mentions Arctic exploration, there has been a concerted push from Chinese military scholars to bolster capabilities that can protect national interests in the region. This includes the development of advanced icebreakers and navigation technology. The military buildup is perceived as a direct challenge to the established international order, akin to China's actions in the South China Sea. The United States, along with its allies, has expressed significant concern regarding China's intentions. Reports from the U.S. Coast Guard and officials, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, have categorized China as a threat to the rules-based order in the Arctic. U.S. assessments suggest that China's military activities in the Arctic could mirror its aggressive behavior in other maritime regions, indicating a potential for geopolitical competition. International response and tensions. The response from the international community, particularly from Arctic nations like Denmark, Norway, and the United States, has been one of skepticism and caution. The fear is that China's dual-use capabilities, which blend civilian and military applications, could lead to increased tensions. There are growing concerns among Arctic nations regarding China's expanding influence as it seeks to assert its presence not only through economic means but also through military enhancement. China, facing international criticism, has attempted to project an image of cooperation and multilateralism. Chinese officials have reiterated their commitment to international law and have expressed a desire to strengthen diplomatic ties through scientific collaboration and participation in forums such as the Arctic Council. However, the challenge remains for China to balance its economic ambitions with the need for regional stability. Timeline of key developments. 1. 2011 – Introduction of Arctic objectives in China's 12th Five-Year Plan. 2. 2015 – National Security Law enacted referencing Arctic exploration. 3. 2018 – Publication of China's Arctic policy and formal inclusion of the Polar Silk Road in its Belt and Road Initiative. For 2019 onwards, increased military presence and Arctic expeditions raising scrutiny from other Arctic nations. Common and divergent perspectives. While analyses of China's Arctic strategy converge on the recognition of its growing assertiveness, perspectives diverge on whether the primary focus is commercial or military. The Arctic Institute emphasizes the necessity for cooperation to achieve China's goals, whereas U.S.-centric studies underline the implications of a military buildup and the potential for conflict. This divergence illustrates the complexities of international relations in the Arctic, where economic interests and security concerns are intricately linked. Strategic implications of China's presence in Greenland. China's interest in Greenland is particularly noteworthy due to the island's rich natural resources and strategic location. The potential for mining operations, research stations, and infrastructure projects presents significant opportunities for economic investment. However, these developments come with security implications, raising concerns among the U.S. and its allies about the potential for increased Chinese military presence in the region. Greenland's strategic significance is amplified by its proximity to North America, making it a focal point for geopolitical competition. As tensions between the US and China escalate, the Arctic could become a new frontier for conflict mirroring competition observed in other contested regions. The role of Greenland in China's Arctic strategy. Greenland's abundant mineral resources and strategic location have caught the attention of China, leading to increased investment and diplomatic engagement. In recent years, Chinese companies have expressed interest in mining operations, fisheries, and infrastructure development in Greenland. This growing economic footprint could lead to a more substantial Chinese presence on the island, which may raise concerns among the US and its allies regarding national security and regional stability. Furthermore, China's investments in Greenland could be viewed as part of a broader strategy to expand its influence in the Arctic, potentially leading to increased military capabilities in the region. The US has been particularly vigilant about Chinese investments in critical infrastructure such as ports and communications, which could potentially serve dual purposes. China's diplomatic engagement and international cooperation. In response to international skepticism, China has emphasized its commitment to multilateralism and adherence to international law and Arctic governance. Through participation in the Arctic Council and other international forums, China seeks to assert its role as a responsible player in Arctic affairs. This approach aims to mitigate concerns about its intentions while fostering relationships with Arctic nations. China has also engaged in scientific cooperation with Arctic states, promoting initiatives that emphasize environmental research and sustainable development. These efforts are designed to enhance China's legitimacy in the region and demonstrate a commitment to addressing global challenges, such as climate change. Looking ahead, navigating challenges and opportunities. China's Arctic strategy is characterized by a complex interplay of commercial interests, military preparedness, and international diplomacy. As tensions rise in the region, the challenge for China will be to navigate its relationships with Arctic nations while safeguarding its strategic interests. The future of China's involvement in the Arctic will depend on its ability to balance its ambitions with the need for regional cooperation and stability. The potential for conflict remains a pressing concern, particularly as Arctic nations bolster their military capabilities in response to perceived threats. In conclusion, China's expanding influence in Greenland and the broader Arctic presents both opportunities and challenges. The international community must remain vigilant in monitoring developments in the region, ensuring that the Arctic remains a space for cooperation rather than conflict. As geopolitical dynamics evolve, the Arctic will undoubtedly become a crucial arena for international relations, requiring careful navigation from all parties involved. The content provided explores China's expanding influence in the Arctic, particularly in Greenland, amid rising international tensions. Key points of counterintuitive information include: 1. Military versus commercial intentions. While many analyses perceive China's Arctic ambitions as primarily militaristic, significant evidence suggests that commercial interests are at the forefront. China's increasing diplomatic and scientific efforts appear to be aimed at ensuring access to resources and trade routes rather than outright military dominance. This perspective contrasts with the common narrative that emphasizes military threats. 2. China's collaboration with Arctic nations. Despite being viewed as a challenger to the rules-based order, China actively seeks collaboration with Arctic nations. Reports indicate that China emphasizes multilateralism and adherence to international law, which might seem counterintuitive given the prevailing view of its aggressive posture. Its diplomatic engagement through scientific cooperation can be seen as a strategic move to mitigate tensions while pursuing its interests. 3. Perception of threats. The framing of China as a primary threat in the Arctic often parallels its actions in the South China Sea, suggesting a consistent pattern of aggression. However, the content highlights that China's military presence in the Arctic is not as aggressive or established as in other regions, pointing to a more cautious approach in balancing its military buildup with the need for regional stability. For legal interpretations and claims, China's legal stance regarding Arctic waters is positioned as consistent with international law, particularly UNCLOS. This contrasts sharply with its more aggressive interpretations in the South China Sea, suggesting a nuanced approach that may not align with the expectations of more aggressive territorial claims. The expectation that China would act similarly in the Arctic as in other contested waters may be overly simplistic. 5. Potential for collaboration with the U.S. There are indications that China could align with U.S. interests regarding open trade routes in the Arctic, contrasting with the adversarial relationship often highlighted in other geopolitical contexts. The notion that China could see cooperation with the U.S. as a viable path in the Arctic due to shared interests challenges the prevailing narrative of inevitable conflict. 6. Skepticism towards Russia. While Russia is often seen as a potential ally for China in the Arctic, there is a notable skepticism from China regarding Russia's militarization in the region. This suggests that China's approach will not be uniform and may involve navigating complex relationships with both cooperation and caution. 7. China's military capacity building. The claim that China is building military capabilities specifically for the Arctic may be overstated. Much of its military focus remains tied to other regions, primarily the South China Sea. This indicates that while Arctic interests are important, they do not overshadow China's broader military strategy. 8. Geopolitical dynamics. The Arctic is not treated as an isolated geopolitical issue for China. Instead, its strategies in the Arctic are interconnected with broader global maritime dynamics. The potential legal ramifications of its Arctic claims could have repercussions beyond the Arctic, indicating a strategic depth that transcends regional interests. These counterintuitive points illustrate a more complex and nuanced picture of China's aspirations in the Arctic, challenging simplified narratives of aggression and threat. In the report on China's expanding influence in Greenland and the associated security risks in the Arctic, several important elements are likely to be overlooked by the general public. These elements not only highlight the complexity of the situation but also underscore the significant geopolitical implications of China's actions in the Arctic region. 1. China's transition from scientific exploration to military presence. While many discussions about China's Arctic ambitions focus on its economic interests, the shift from scientific exploration to military capacity building is crucial. The report mentions that China's Arctic strategy gained momentum following the 2015 National Security Law, which explicitly references Arctic exploration. This transition reflects a broader trend where China has increasingly framed its Arctic activities within a security context, which is significant because it signals a potential militarization of the region. The implications of this militarization are profound, as it could lead to heightened tensions, particularly with Arctic nations that feel threatened by China's dual-use capabilities. Significance. The importance of recognizing this shift lies in understanding that China's intentions in the Arctic are not solely economic but also strategic. This duality raises alarms among Arctic nations, especially as military capabilities could be deployed under the guise of civilian research and economic development. 2. The role of international law and legal contradictions. China's approach to international law in the Arctic reveals a complex and often contradictory stance compared to its behavior in other maritime regions, particularly the South China Sea. The report indicates that China adheres to the majority interpretation of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea UNCLOS concerning the Arctic, while simultaneously employing a revisionist approach in the South China Sea. This contradiction poses legal challenges for China, as its actions in the Arctic could undermine its legal claims in other regions. Significance. This aspect is often overlooked but is critical for understanding the geopolitical dynamics at play. If China's legal arguments in the Arctic are perceived as hypocritical due to its actions elsewhere, it could weaken its standing in international negotiations and relations with other countries. This inconsistency could also embolden other nations to challenge China's maritime claims, potentially leading to increased global tensions. 3. Strategic partnerships and rivalries. China's relationship with Russia in the Arctic is multifaceted, characterized by both collaboration and competition. While Russia is seen as a potential ally in Arctic endeavors, there is also a growing mutual skepticism regarding military buildup and influence in the region. The report mentions that even Russia has expressed concerns about China's military presence, indicating that Beijing's aspirations may not align seamlessly with Moscow's interests. Significance: this dynamic is significant because it highlights the precarious balance China must maintain in its Arctic strategy. Over-reliance on Russia could backfire if their interests diverge or if Russia perceives China's actions as encroaching on its own influence. This complexity underscores the need for China to navigate carefully between fostering cooperation and managing competition, which could ultimately shape the geopolitical landscape in the Arctic. 4. The impact of climate change on geopolitical strategies. The report emphasizes that climate change is making Arctic resources and trade routes more accessible, which is a driving factor behind China's increased interest in the region. This point is critical as it connects environmental changes directly to geopolitical strategies. As ice melts and new shipping routes open, the competition for resources intensifies, leading to potential conflicts. Significance: ignoring the environmental dimension oversimplifies the situation. Climate change is not just an ecological issue, it is reshaping global power dynamics. The Arctic is becoming a focal point for resource competition, and the interplay between environmental change and national security strategies will be crucial in determining future conflicts or cooperation in the region. 5. The Polar Silk Road and its implications. China's incorporation of the Arctic into its Belt and Road Initiative (BRI) through the concept of the Polar Silk Road is significant. This initiative is not merely an economic strategy but is also a means of establishing a foothold in the Arctic, with implications for trade, resource exploration, and strategic military positioning. The report indicates that China aims to secure infrastructure and support services in the Arctic, which would enhance its operational capabilities in the region. Significance: the Polar Silk Road represents a long-term strategic vision that could reshape global trade patterns and power structures. By establishing a network of partnerships and infrastructure in the Arctic, China could enhance its influence, significantly challenging the dominance of traditional Arctic powers. This ambition is critical for understanding the future of Arctic governance and international relations. 6. The role of Arctic governance institutions. China's active participation in Arctic governance institutions such as the Arctic Council is another often overlooked aspect. The report notes that China seeks to enhance its diplomatic ties through scientific cooperation and engagement in multilateral forums. This participation is significant because it allows China to influence the norms and rules governing Arctic activities, potentially reshaping the established order. Significance: the ability to participate in and influence Arctic governance is crucial for China as it seeks to assert its rights and interests in the region. By positioning itself as a responsible stakeholder, China aims to legitimize its activities and counter criticisms of its strategic ambitions. Understanding this aspect is essential for grasping how China navigates international relations in the Arctic and seeks to mitigate concerns from other Arctic nations. In summary, the report highlights several critical dimensions of China's expanding influence in Greenland and the Arctic that are often overlooked. These elements: military developments, legal contradictions, strategic partnerships, climate change implications, the Polar Silk Road Initiative, and governance roles, are integral to understanding the complexity of the geopolitical landscape in the Arctic. Recognizing these nuances is vital for policymakers, analysts, and the public as tensions continue to rise in this strategically important region. 1. China's strategic interests in the Arctic. China's evolving interests in the Arctic have transitioned from scientific exploration to a more assertive strategy encompassing commercial, military, and geopolitical dimensions. The Polar Silk Road, part of the Belt and Road Initiative, illustrates China's ambitions to access Arctic resources and trade routes which are becoming increasingly viable due to climate change. This strategic pivot highlights the dual nature of China's activities in the region, where commercial endeavors are intertwined with military and geopolitical aspirations. 2. Military developments and security implications. The increasing military focus in China's Arctic strategy raises significant security concerns among Arctic nations. China's military capacity building, particularly in navigation technologies and icebreaking capabilities, is viewed as a challenge to the established international order. The U.S. and other Arctic nations perceive this military buildup as potentially destabilizing, drawing parallels to China's assertiveness in the South China Sea. This dual-use nature of China's Arctic activities, where civilian research could bolster military capabilities, underscores the complexity of its intentions and the potential for conflict in the region. 3. International response and geopolitical tensions. The skeptical response from the U.S. and its allies towards China's Arctic ambitions reflects broader geopolitical tensions. Arctic nations including Denmark and Norway have echoed concerns about China's intentions, fearing that its activities might extend beyond peaceful scientific exploration into militarization. The framing of the Arctic as a new arena for geopolitical competition akin to tensions in the South China Sea indicates the potential for conflict arising from differing interpretations of rights and governance in the region. 4. Balancing economic ambitions with diplomatic engagement. China's diplomatic engagement in the Arctic, characterized by multilateralism and adherence to international law, aims to mitigate international skepticism and enhance its role in Arctic governance. However, the challenge lies in balancing these diplomatic efforts with its economic ambitions, particularly in light of rising tensions with Arctic nations. The contradiction between China's legal interpretations in the Arctic and its approach in other maritime regions could undermine its credibility and complicate efforts to foster cooperation with Arctic states. The future of China's Arctic strategy will thus depend on its ability to navigate these complexities while safeguarding its interests. 1. The Cold War and the Arctic, the U.S.-Soviet rivalry. During the Cold War, the Arctic became a strategic battleground between the United States and the Soviet Union, where both superpowers sought to assert dominance over the region. The U.S. established military bases in Alaska and sought to monitor Soviet activities in the Arctic, while the USSR expanded its military presence in the Northern Territories. This era saw increased reconnaissance flights, submarine activities, and the establishment of early warning systems to detect potential threats. The competition for Arctic resources and strategic positioning mirrored contemporary concerns over China's rising influence and military capabilities in the region. 2. The scramble for Africa, colonial powers in the late 19th century. In the late 19th century, European powers engaged in an aggressive scramble for Africa, seeking to expand their territories and secure valuable resources. This period was marked by significant geopolitical tensions as nations like Britain, France, and Germany vied for control over African lands. The establishment of colonial rule often led to conflicts and the exploitation of local populations. Similar to China's current ambitions in Greenland and the Arctic, the motivations behind the scramble were driven by economic interests, strategic considerations, and national pride, raising concerns about the implications for local sovereignty and international relations. 3. The South China Sea disputes, territorial claims, and military buildup. The ongoing territorial disputes in the South China Sea serve as a contemporary parallel to China's actions in the Arctic. Nations like China, Vietnam, the Philippines, and Malaysia have conflicting claims over various islands and maritime zones, with China asserting its presence through military installations and naval patrols. The U.S. has responded by conducting freedom of navigation operations and strengthening alliances with regional partners. This situation reflects the broader themes of international competition, resource exploitation, and security concerns as nations navigate complex geopolitical dynamics in contested waters, much like the Arctic scenario with China's expanding influence in Greenland. Future outlook: predictions for China's influence in Greenland and Arctic security risks. As China's presence in Greenland and the broader Arctic continues to evolve, Several key trends and predictions can be identified that will shape the geopolitical landscape in the coming years. These predictions are grounded in China's strategic objectives, the responses of Arctic nations, and the international security environment. 1. Increased strategic military presence. China is likely to enhance its military capabilities in the Arctic, driven by its need to protect its economic interests and assert its rights in the region. This will involve the construction of more icebreakers, naval vessels, and surveillance systems to strengthen its operational capacity. By 2030, we may see a more robust Chinese naval presence in the Arctic Ocean, including the deployment of submarines and advanced reconnaissance capabilities. This military buildup will be closely watched by the United States and its allies, leading to a potential arms race in the region. 2. Escalating geopolitical tensions. The Arctic may become a hotspot for geopolitical tensions reminiscent of the South China Sea disputes. As China's assertiveness grows, Arctic nations like Canada, Denmark, and Norway may take firmer stances to protect their territorial claims and resources. Potential flashpoints could include disagreements over navigation rights in the Northeast and Northwest Passages, which may provoke diplomatic conflicts or even military standoffs. 3. Diplomatic maneuvering and multilateral engagement. China will likely continue to emphasize its commitment to multilateralism and international law to counterbalance criticisms of its Arctic ambitions. Expect China to engage in strategic partnerships, particularly with Russia, to bolster its standing in the Arctic Council and other forums. By 2035, we may see China playing a leading role in shaping Arctic governance frameworks, pushing for rules that favor its interests while advocating for collective management of resources. 4. Economic investments and infrastructure development. China's investments in Greenland will likely expand, focusing on resource extraction, infrastructure development, and scientific research. The Polar Silk Road Initiative may gain traction, with China seeking to establish trade routes and logistical hubs in the region. Over the next decade, Greenland could become a focal point for Chinese investments, leading to economic dependencies that may complicate the territory's relationships with other Arctic nations. 5. Climate change and environmental challenges. The effects of climate change will continue to reshape the Arctic landscape, creating both opportunities and challenges for all stakeholders. As ice melts, new shipping routes will open, increasing competition for access and resources. By 2030, we may witness increased maritime traffic, raising concerns about environmental protection and potential accidents, which could spark further tensions among Arctic nations and China. 6. Legal and normative challenges. China's stance on Arctic governance could create contradictions with its policies in other regions, as it seeks to assert its rights based on international legal frameworks like UNCLOS. It may face pushback from Arctic nations that hold differing views on sovereignty and maritime rights. By 2025, legal disputes could arise, prompting international arbitration or renewed discussions on maritime law that could redefine norms in the Arctic. 7. Domestic political considerations in China. The Chinese government will likely leverage its Arctic strategy to bolster national pride and showcase its global leadership ambitions. As domestic challenges mount, including economic slowdowns and social unrest, the regime might use foreign policy successes in the Arctic to rally public support. By 2030, we could see a narrative that frames Arctic engagement as a vital component of China's resurgence as a global power. 8. Innovative technologies and research collaborations. China will increasingly invest in advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence and remote sensing to enhance its capabilities in Arctic navigation and resource management. By 2035, we may witness significant technological collaborations with Arctic nations and research initiatives, albeit with underlying tensions regarding dual-use technologies that could serve military purposes. Conclusion. The future of China's influence in Greenland and the Arctic is poised to be characterized by a complex interplay of military, economic, and diplomatic factors. as it seeks to assert its interests while navigating the responses from Arctic nations and the broader international community. The potential for conflict will remain a persistent concern. Policymakers must remain vigilant and proactive in addressing these emerging security risks to safeguard regional stability in the Arctic. The coming years will be crucial in determining how effectively China balances its ambitions against the geopolitical realities of an increasingly contested Arctic environment.